Thank you. Good morning. So one of the nice things about this forum is that we have touch points on all the points of the continuum, from site identification to recruitment. Can folks in the back hear me okay? Not so much. Okay. Oh, you are? Okay. So I thought it made a lot of sense when it was pointed out to us that we didn't have anybody touching on retention yet, to go ahead and make sure we're addressing that. And some of the speakers have already touched on it. And if it isn't overwhelming enough to be really thinking about what level of detail you need to get into for these recruitment programs, and I feel like we're getting to a point in the industry where people are facing the reality of a need for an early investment and planning for recruitment. And now let's take it even a step further for our stretch goal. Let's look at retention. Let's understand what that means and how to prepare for that. So what do we mean by retention? Because just as Abby was saying, I think we mean some different things when we talk about feasibility. The same is true for some of our other terms, and that extends into retention. So something that I think is important is that we really do think of this as a set of actions. It's not just a mentality. It's not just that we wish, we want the patients to stay in, to stay static. It is actually an action to be retained into a clinical study. And there's three components that come into play for this. Not only do we want them to sustain the original interest that brought them into the study, but we want them to remain compliant with the study visits and actually finish the trial all the way to the end, to not lose that commitment. And if we're doing our job well at the end of this, they'll also have had a positive experience, one that they will be sharing with others, relating to others, and perhaps then be more willing to participate in a clinical trial again. Are folks here familiar with a survey that was done with parents of children who had participated in clinical trials, and they asked if they would ever enroll themselves or another child or their child into another clinical trial? And unfortunately, the results of that were not very positive. And the correlation came directly back to how much information they had been given through the course of the study. Not just the enrollment into the study, but they felt like once they were enrolled, nobody was really talking to them. Nobody was really telling them what was going on and what did it mean and what were the long-term implications, and they just really weren't very interested in doing it again. Now that's one narrow example. I'm not in any way stating that patients are overall dissatisfied with clinical trials. So when we think of retention, one model that you can use to sort of help yourself remember the landscape and the major aspects that you want to emphasize, we call it the 4 E's. So setting expectations, reinforcing these expectations, educate, educate, educate over and over and over again, leveraging that initial motivation that brought the patient to the trial, and then keeping them engaged throughout that. So those are 4 major touch points that we'll talk about today. John Needham, where are you? All right. So speaking of expectations, so this is actually the primary driver, right? And so Manley was talking about the informed consents, and I'm guilty of having written 17-page informed consents myself. But there's lots of tools out there now that can help the study coordinator and the PI facilitate that discussion so that not just does the patient end up in a place where they agree to participate, but they're very clear on what it is that they're going to be doing at each and every study visit, and they have some easy reference guide that they can go back. And all of this is dependent on how complicated that study is in the beginning. You also want to talk to them in advance, just like any other project that you're doing. What do you have to do? What's the backup plan? If for some reason I can't come to my visit, how exactly do I go about rescheduling, and what are the windows? Having them understand, look, we really have to get you back in here within 3 days of this target date. So if you don't show up, don't feel concerned. Don't be ashamed about it. Just pick up the phone and tell me, or let's find another way to get you back in. So then the other thing is, speaking of budgets, we're often asked about retention after the trial's already been going on for a while, site budgets are in place, and then there's this question of, well, what can we compensate for? Can we increase the compensation? We didn't quite realize how many patients we would have that actually need assistance with logistical aspects to make their visits to the study. So when you're even doing your site qualification visits or your initiation visits, really dig down into those details of, well, let's see, how many patients do you think are going to need to have this assistance? And one thing that we and others do, we'll look at the availability of public transportation, things like that that you need to understand on a site level. And again, there's plenty of tools out there that can be utilized to help with all of these things.